Have you ever asked a child to draw a picture of God? It's quite amazing, you know. It can be fascinating since, for the most part, children see God as a man, either in the sky, on a cloud, at least not living here on earth, but someplace else, typically with a white beard. Their concepts can easily have been ours either as children or before we discovered religious science. And I love this picture because it's like God is watching over his Zoom room with all of the inhabitants of the earth. It certainly updates what it was from when I was a child. Now, if you ask adults to describe God, they might say something like loving, beautiful, merciful, kind. Or ask an adult to define God, and they might use words like compassionate, caring, forgiving. Now, if we ask the same individual to define or describe themselves or others, it's highly unlikely that they would use the same words they used for God. And yet we are all made in God's image. We're all wonderfully made. God created us with a heart to reflect his love. The very center of our being was designated or designed to be a reflection of who he is. We were not made gods, but were made in God's image. The heart of all of us was created to be the very center of God's being. Remember, our heart is likewise the center of our body. It's not in our head. Robert Pirsig, in his book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, says that the way to change the world is to start with our own heart and work outward. Notice he said, with our own heart working outward, not inward. We understand, or he understood the Hebrew psychology that was saying the heart is the center of the will of man. It is our very core. There are several places in the Bible that tell us that we were made in God's image. Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Or John 1:3, everything came to be by his hand. Without him, not even one thing was created and came to be. Acts 17:24, for the God who made the world and all things therein. Having the image or likeness of God means, in the simplest terms, we were made to resemble God. It sets human beings apart from the animal world. We were made to have dominion over the earth, which enables us to commune with the divine also. It's a likeness, mentally, morally, and socially. Notice I didn't say physical likeness. Mentally, humanity was created as a rational being. In other words, human beings can reason and we have the ability to choose. This is a reflection of God's intellect and freedom. Anytime someone invents a machine, writes a book, paints a landscape, enjoys a symphony, calculates a sum, or names a pet, he or she is proclaiming the fact that they are made in God's image. Morally, and humanity was created in righteousness and perfect innocence, a reflection of God's holiness. God saw that all that he had made, humanity included, and called it very good. You are very good. Our conscious or moral compass is a vestige of that original state. Whenever someone writes a law, praises good behavior, or feels guilty, He or she is confirming the fact that they were made in God's image. Socially, humanity was created for fellowship. This reflects God's triune nature and her love. In Eden, humanity's primary relationship was with God implies fellowship with God. Also, God made the first woman because it is not good for man to be alone. Every time someone marries, makes a friend, hugs a child, or attends church, he or she is demonstrating the fact that we are made in the likeness of God. We are all wonderfully made in the tune with the infinite and as one with the infinite. Regardless if we are disabled or the police officer who sat on George Floyd, the 9/11 terrorists, or the folks who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, we are all made wonderfully in the image of the divine. It is what we choose to make of our image and God's creation that differs from Spirit's original intentions. And remember that the only way God has of experiencing life is through you and me. It's through all of us. A minister was taking his son to baseball practice one day. And as they were driving along, the son asked a deep and serious question. It was a theological question. Dad wasn't quite expecting this. And as young as he was, he asked a question as he still sat in his trainer seat or his safety seat in the back seat of the VW they were riding in. He said, "Dad, are there like 1,000 gods out there?" Dad replied, "No, buddy, there's only one God." He offered a thoughtful counter question. Then how can God live inside of everyone at once? Now, the minister and dad struggled with how to respond to that. How do you explain the complexity of God to a child who hasn't yet grasped mystery or metaphor? Well, a little piece of God lives in all of us, said the dad. And without missing a beat, the boy responded, "Cool, I call the head." In his concrete mind, that made sense. And he wasn't totally off. We do carry the physical pieces of God within us, but we do carry parts of God's nature within us. I'm sorry, we do not carry the physical pieces of God within us. Each of us is capable of representing aspects of God to each other. For example, we carry God's wisdom within. We're capable of making wise choices, wise decisions. We can all be giving unconditional love to others. Each of us has kindness and goodness within us. We can come up with creative solutions to our problems. There are so many God qualities within each of us, and yet we fail to see, or in the instance of some, we fail to use those qualities for the good of everyone. In order to understand how in tune we are with the infinite, we must be willing in our spiritual practice to ask to be taken down deep within. We must ride that elevator down into the darkness to shed light on what we haven't seen and known consciously about ourselves. And that can be a scary thing. It's shedding light on the parts of ourselves at a depth that we may not be willing to face yet. Often we begin to see the light as we go down, as we work on ourselves spiritually. And when we begin to explore ourselves at that greater depth, we fear often what may rise up and we might have to face. When we're afraid of more intimate relationships with the light, and that's with a capital L, fears set in because we have a deep attraction to the darkness, which we feel comfortable with. We feel comfortable with it because it's been with us for so long, and we fear change. And yet we have to give the gift of healing and wholeness to ourselves. We begin the process of spiritual growth and wholeness. And if we don't give to ourselves, how can we possibly give to others in a way that is loving, kind, and compassionate? But once we ask to go deeper, once we surrender to a greater depth of self-spiritual understanding, then the logical thing is the next questions or the next statements come up. Why am I here now at this moment in time? What is my purpose? Or you may ask, reveal to me why I was put together at this moment in time. Show me the path to take on the fork in the road that will expand my spiritual being and my knowledge. I don't know about you, but I don't want to have an ordinary life. In my book, not having spiritual practice is living an ordinary life. I want to know how deep I can take the down elevator into uncharted places of my soul. I want to discover just how much I'm willing to shed the darkness into light. I want to heal the wounds of the past, not just put a Band-Aid on it. So that I can be the presence of the infinite that I have been called to be, that all of us have been called to be. And part of the challenge in all of that, part of why we sometimes run, is because our soul, which indeed is our consciousness. According to Fillmore and the Revealing Word, in man, the soul is the many accumulated ideas back of his present expression. Everything we experience is meant for our awakening. It is meant to make us more in tune with the infinite. We are more than we see, than we know, than we do. It's just down there deep in our soul. We're not ordinary unless we are not ordinary unless we choose to be. Ordinary is defined as with no special distinctive features, what is commonplace or standard with no special quality. Jimmy Johnson once said, the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is that little extra. And when we open ourselves to spiritual practice, we are exploring how wonderfully made and extraordinary we truly are. We're going the extra mile, so to speak. It's that willingness to go deeper, stay longer, reach out more in order to learn and to grow. It's asking the questions that are hard. So I would ask you, what is the little extra you are willing to do in your spiritual awakening to know and understand just how extraordinary you truly are? Our soul is like the energy bunny. Our soul is our creative battery. It never stops operating and is present all the time. Ernest Holmes in The Science of Mind tells us we are using the word soul in the sense of a universal soul or a medium through which spirit operates. It is the Holy Ghost or the third person of the spiritual Trinity. Like the creative soil in which seeds are planted and from which plant life comes, the soul of the universe is the creative medium into which the word of spirit falls and from which creation arises. We need only look at the creative process chart in the back of the textbook to understand Holmes' analogy of seeds. Remember in your Science of Mind classes, the seed, soil, plant process? Spirit is the seed, soul is the soil, and body is the plant. Remember, we are never not creating. Our subconscious is always creating, and everything we experience is meant for our awakening. It is meant for our spiritual growth as we continue to delve deeper and deeper into the light. If you were to ever come to my home, you would find about 60 rose bushes. My parents loved rose bushes. I grew up with rose bushes in our yard. In fact, they had about 75 of them in their last home. Roses have a great deal to teach us about growth. You see, every January, it's time to trim the roses. And so you go out typically on the third weekend of January and you take your pruners out there and you trim the rose bushes back to where they're only standing about 18 to 24 inches tall. You get rid of all the small limbs, the leaves that have, and this part about the bush that has withered and died. Those too need to be removed. In fact, when I first learned how to do this, my dad taught me and I thought he was nuts. How was this bush ever going to produce growth again? And what you have to come to understand, however, is that the greater the trim, the greater the crop in the spring. The rose bush needs to be trimmed to have greater growth. Just like all of us, we must be trimmed of what no longer serves us. We must be trimmed of the dead wood and let it go. And then in the spring, as the new branches start to grow, tiny buds begin to flourish on each branch. And then something unique happens. And as Nin put it, and then the day came when the risk to remain tight in that bud was more painful than the risk of blooming. And we, like that rosebud that comes every spring, when we live in the darkness and are afraid to experience the light, we stay tight like the rosebud. In fact, sometimes it takes a spiritual crisis to wake us up. A spiritual crisis is caused by mismanagement of our power. We're afraid to let the rosebud blossom. We fear going to the divine light, and we must be honest not only with ourselves, but with others as well. If not, we are out of integrity and betraying ourselves and others. Sometimes this is simply caused by a lack of trust for ourselves. We don't think we can be fully know who we are when we lack trust. You know, there's a sign on my desk. It says, "Speak from your heart, Eileen, not from your head." So often that is where our spiritual challenge of growth comes from, is our head. We can't seem to move from here to down here, that 18 inches down into our soul to know our truth. Often I am reminded by my spiritual mentor that problems cannot be solved at the same level they were created. We have to be willing to let go of our head and listen to the divine guidance within. We've all heard of that statement that peace begins with me. Well, that's not the only example. Love, kindness, compassion all begin with me. To be able to show up and give those God qualities to others, we must be willing to give it not only to ourselves, but heal those parts within us that do not allow us to give love and kindness and compassion. Years ago, scientists discovered something in our brain system called the default mode network. And what they found was there was a network within the brain that would support and become active when the individual focused on the internal rather than the external. And there were diagrams that I saw that showed all the interconnectedness within the brain. So again, when we're willing to look within, we are supported, and spiritual growth transpires by our own inner body that was so magnificently created by the divine. If we don't face our inside issues, nothing will get resolved. When we fail to move to the light, We fail to heal our separation from ourselves, others, and the divine. And yet, when we heal ourselves, others are healed with us. Migliore described the image of God as expressing self, transcending life in relationships with others, with the holy other we call God, and with all those different others who need our help, whose help we also need in order to be human creatures, intends us to be. We're not in this journey alone. Just like the last 11 months from COVID, we are in this process together. We're here to support each other, to be with each other, even if it's only by Zoom. We were each made in the image of the divine infinite, and we were wonderfully made. We're here to grow together, to love, to be kind, to be one with another. We're here to heal our inner challenges and to move away from the darkness and into the light divine. We're here to build bridges and to heal our separation. We're here to embrace our oneness with the infinite. This is the truth in my life. This is the truth in yours. And so it is. Amen.